Greetings and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Dave, and it is my absolute pleasure once again to welcome you all to the fourth episode of Climate Baithak. Let me just take a moment to very briefly discuss as to why we are here. The South Asian region, which is home to nearly a quarter of the world's population, is alarmingly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Young people across South Asian region are actually at the forefronts of this evolving climate crisis. It is in this context that Climate Baithak serves as a platform where we know about our collective challenges, where we bring our experiences from different corners of this vast region to forge a deeper understanding and solidarity, and also help us understand of our shared experiences. Throughout our series, we aim to highlight these young voices, bringing together a diverse group of passionate individuals across South Asian region who are not just witness to this positive change, but are also the ones driving it. Before we proceed, I would also like to note on a personal note that as a part of the growing youth-led climate justice movement, we attempt to contribute to a movement that is not just about saving our planet, but also about upholding the rights and dignity of every individual who calls it home. Recent events in the West Asian region have deeply affected a lot of us around the world. The whole situation now has entered its third month. We recently saw a resolution being passed at the UN General Assembly calling for immediate ceasefire. At Climate Zero 2, we stand in solidarity with thousands of innocent families, vulnerable people affected by violence. We firmly stand for peace and strongly hope that this cycle of violence and destruction be broken for the sake of human dignity and safety. Without further ado, now let me take this opportunity to introduce our guest for today, Mr. Hoodh Ibrahim from the Republic of Maldives. Hoodh is a researcher, communications specialist, and a political scientist with experience of working with high level government panels, NGOs, and private sector management. Hoodh is currently the lead editor for Journal for Youth, Peace, and Security, and is also a lecturer for International Relations and Governance in Maldives National University, who has authored research papers on transformative resilience of young people. Thank you so much for taking out time to be here today, Hood. It is our absolute pleasure. On a personal note, having had the privilege of knowing him personally during UNOCT's policy dialogue event in Thailand last year, I can tell he is an exceptionally charismatic and passionate leader. Thank you once again for being here, Hood. Just to get started, I'm really curious to know your experience of working with young people of the Republic of Maldives, since Maldives, being a very vulnerable and highly susceptible, island nation to the changing climate. And in some of our earlier conversations, you also mentioned that you're also working for leveraging technology and innovative island conservation methods. So I would like to know more about it as well. To you, Hood.
Hi. Thank you, Dev, so much for this opportunity. And I would like to thank Climate Baithak for this wonderful platform that you have built and your team, including Farhan, and all of the other members that are behind this initiative. And especially, I would really be very appreciative and thank you for that moment of solidarity that you shared for the continuing conflict in the Middle Eastern region, especially in Palestine. And that was a very good call on your behalf, especially when we are working in the peace sector. With regards to the climate justice and also climate movement in the Maldives, as you may know, Maldives is one of the most low-lying countries in the world and is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis that we are facing currently. And this may be an opportunity. Maldives is kind of like an opportunity for the world to show that we can share solidarity and perhaps save the Maldives from the current fate, which it looks at, like it's almost like looking down the barrel at the direct impacts of the climate crisis that we are facing. The young people of the Maldives, especially the youth activism around climate movement and also climate justice, is very strong. The young people feel particularly passionately with regards to climate, working with grassroots level and community level leaders in different parts of the Maldives. It is astonishing and also quite remarkable and incredible to see the energy and also to look at their innovative ideas, but in particular, their optimism and their hope for the future. Even facing several international challenges and almost a challenge that looks at the species level. This could be an insurmountable problem for the human race. young people in the Maldives still have not lost their hope. They are still working arm in arm and working together to find ways that the Maldives ship and oh, I thought I lost you for a second. Can
I
you hear
thought,
me?
yeah, I can hear you. I just lost you for some time, just for a few seconds. No worries.
I think that's yeah. So as I was saying, there is young people are finding the difficulty of working on a species level existential threat, essentially, which is climate change. However, we see that leveraging technology, new technologies, and emerging fields of knowledge, and also using new international frameworks such as the the loss and damages framework that has come out of the COP mechanism, particularly focusing on adaptation, which is the looking at how we can change our behavior and how we can look at the environment and plan better for the future. Because at this point, there will be some impact that we will feel, or there'll be a great level of impact that the Maldives will go through. And right now, the Maldives itself being a country of some 500,000 people, we are not in a position to either to impact climate change so effectively that it will either be stopped just by the actions of one young person or a few young people in the Maldives. Even the entire population working together might not have the impact it is required right now, the partnerships that is required. But coming out of the COP28, which was held in Dubai as well, young Maldivians, students of the Maldives National University, as well as young community leaders, made the trip, traveled to these conferences, engaged with world leaders, and spoke at these forums to leverage their voice and to share the best, like the treasure which of the Maldives is that we have highly educated young people and expressing it about
Who the Is everything okay with the internet? Who
hello,
am I
Dave?
audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay. Got you back. Sorry about that.
okay. I'm not sure if it's my internet or it's yours. I'm really sorry this is happening.
Yeah.
If somebody at the backstage of our tech team can help, I think it's fine for now. All right, cool. So, are you saying something because you're on mute?
Oh, no. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
All right. That's great. So,
Cool, cool.
as I was saying, leveraging international platforms, working within the international mechanisms as a small island nation. We call ourselves a small island nation because we are made up of some several thousands of islands as well as 200 inhabited islands. So we have to work with our partners, our international and bilateral partners, as well as work with international organizations and work within the frameworks and mechanisms that are available to us. Key among which is the loss and damages framework and also within the adaptation funding and financing that is available. So overall, I think that would be a short summary of the work that's being done. And I would be more than happy to share with you some of the innovative and also very creative work that is being done across the length and breadth of the Maldives.
All right. Thank you so much, Hood. You mentioned that, like we all know, Maldives is a low-lying group of islands, right? And I was reading one of the interviews by your Environment Minister, Her Excellency Aminat Shauna. which was given to International Monetary Fund, wherein she mentions, quote unquote, Maldives is a country that lives and dies by the ocean. On being asked about what is at stake for her country due to the changing climate crisis and the whole climate landscape, she asserted that everything is at stake. Maldives do not have a higher ground where people can, just move just in case the lower levels get submerged. So, given this kind of a situation, and the kind of threat, the existential threat rather, which is being posed to Maldives, what do you think are some of the adaptation strategies with respect to the kind of international international civil societies, as well as the collaboration which is happening within the grassroots levels by grassroots movements and climate justice movements and organizations across Maldives? What kind of new trends have you seen in the past, say, 5 years, 10 years? Has there been an increasing awareness and focus on climate mitigation and adaptation? Or do you think that there has been increasing support from international organizations and civil societies, as well as the intergovernmental collaboration which is happening? What changes have you seen in this landscape in the last five, or let's say a decade or so?
Well, definitely there has been progress that is being made in the Maldives when it comes to climate justice and climate uh, advocacy, especially when we look at things like legal mechanisms to try to transition away and divest away from fossil fuels. The Maldives has currently in place a mechanism or a legal framework which allows for zero taxation on imports of vehicles which are electronic. EV or electrically powered vehicles. So this is, I think, one step, but it's not enough. It's the beginning of a journey. And further, the Maldives has used its position as an internationally recognized tourism destination, or a destination that is quite very easily popular, and people love to visit or look at it from a lens of either luxury destination or almost like sandy beaches and a beautiful honeymoon place to visit when you have something to celebrate. So this platform has been leveraged by the Maldivian government and also by Maldivian policymakers to try to build leadership on climate advocacy and to try to really uh, build talking points, especially in organizations or caucuses that are internationally formulated, like the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which was created in part by former President Nasheed, and also, as you mentioned, our former Environment Minister, Ms. Shauna, also very eloquently has noted that the Maldives' future is invariably tied and intrinsically linked with the ocean and also with climate, because there is no second home for the Maldivians. There are no higher grounds because the Maldives is just about a meter from the sea level at its almost highest, or about 1.5 or 1 meter high when it comes to island formation. And we have almost 90 or 99% of water, which is ocean. We are south of India and southwest of Sri Lanka. So we are like, the Maldives is often popularly called the pearl necklace of the Indian Ocean, because we are a string of islands that look or resemble on a map like a pearl necklace. And as a low-lying country that is very close to the ocean sea level, there are very little that we can do in terms of trying to stop or mitigate climate change, but we can look at adaptation measures. And towards that, we have introduced legal mechanisms like promoting imports of climate-friendly technology, looking at becoming carbon neutral in 2030. These kind of national level goals have been set by policymakers and legislators, and we are also looking at leadership within the climate advocacy and climate justice narrative, because the Maldives, being one country that is easily recognizable and very popular and known for very good reasons, hopefully, which means that we can bring people together to save the beautiful Maldives, might be a cause there are a lot of people may not may get behind or may rally behind, rather than some numbers that might be a little bit esoteric or arbitrary. So that has also been part of the marketing and also part of the leadership on climate activism and climate advocacy. Not to say that numbers are not important, but sometimes you need more than numbers. You need important stories and narratives of people who are actually impacted, the livelihoods of people who use traditional skills, traditional crafts such as mangrove weaving and also coir rope weaving. Young women who have been practicing for ages, for several years, decades, they've been making a livelihood out of mangrove areas, which are very, very susceptible or vulnerable to climate impact. The former minister, I think, highlighted that the takeaway from the COP28 has been that the work program on global goals on adaptation is a very important progress that we have made, and the global goals on adaptation needs to be strengthened to be either to be something that is obligatory or that is binding, and this will build more strength and more momentum to this discussion. When it comes to, as we've spoken, legal mechanisms, national level policy mechanisms, different steps at different level, at the community level, at the non-governmental level, and at volunteer level, young people in the Maldives are doing some amazing things with emerging technologies such as satellite technology, looking at building a national platform to leverage satellite imagery and also ground truthing to identify how islands are impacted and to find out what kind of natural resources are available on which islands, things like seagrass, mangrove areas, and soil erosion, and offering this data in an open fashion, in an open platform for policymakers, local councils, local governance, and national level policymakers to give them the tools or to give them the evidence at least to make evidence informed evidence-based decisions. This has been the narrative or the innovative work of young people, especially in an organization that I've had the pleasure of working with called the Maldives Space Research Organization. Um, the work we do at MESRO, or Maldives Space Research Organization, focuses on building climate resilience through Earth observation or satellite imagery, and also protecting the maritime domain, as the Maldives, as I said, is a 99% ocean-based country. We have the immense goal, or the like this audacious dream of creating space economy or using space technology to build climate resilience and also to foster culture of science and technology. Other than that, I also work with other organizations that are more community-based and focused on smaller scale programs. There is an organization called the Island Conservation Project, which looks at building mangrove protected areas, working with the local governance. So in the north, these young people coming out of the Nunu Atoll are working with the local governance to create protected pockets or protected spaces of mangrove areas, which are nesting spaces or nesting areas for turtles, as well as protected wildlife like bird life, terns, and are very important or essential, crucial for the livelihood of women who are particularly negatively impacted by climate change and also different crises. And this young group of leaders, which I have had the pleasure of advising and working together, what they do is they work with the local governance to identify these mangrove areas and to create protected mangrove parks where there is a mixture of social business, a mixture of uh, this visiting and earning a small income from that, creating employment opportunities on these rural islands, and also creating education for the young people and for the elderly or within society to show that these are natural assets of the island, and these mangrove areas do not need to be converted into large-scale infrastructure projects The trend in the Maldives is building an airport or local domestic airport for almost every island, which might not be the best development model when it comes to a small population and also with very limited land, natural resources. The natural resources we have, like mangroves, like seagrass, are very valuable because what we are selling at the international level as a tourism destination is also our natural beauty. And to find ways to correlate and also this cross-cutting climate impact and also the climate, protecting the climate and also protecting tourism within the Maldives and protecting the Maldives at large are very much interconnected and very much correlated in my personal view, and also with the young people that I work with, they share the same sentiments.
Thank you so much for putting that so eloquently, Hood. You mentioned somewhere that the focus has been on adaptation strategies, and it's not just for Maldives; it's also for a lot of low-lying coastal areas in different countries, continents, and also some of the other islands which face the similar ordeal like Maldives. So, when it comes to adaptation, it cannot be, it is not possible, it's not practical without accessibility to funds. And very recently, as you already mentioned, loss and damage just came out of one of the COPs, and then there was this whole conversation that the first world countries, the developed nations, should pay for all the harm that they've done, for all the historical emissions and things like that. And there is a ongoing lobby, by the nations in the global south, so that we get access to the right amount of funds by these countries, which they have, although they have committed to provide. However, there has not been much progress on that specific aspect. So when it comes to accessibility all of these very crucial development funds for these grassroots organizations that you mentioned, these community based organizations that you mentioned, and for countries which do not have much of a population and their economy is heavily supported by tourism, like that of Maldives, what do you think that these crucial development funds, till what extent do they play a significant role in shaping the climate, mitigation discourse and adaptation discourse? For instance, in India, financial support for such movements, which are working primarily within the grassroots levels, which are working primarily within the marginalized communities, it's very scarce. And for instance, a lot of development groups and a lot of climate justice movements, we are 100% voluntary, run. People come from all across and they volunteer, however do not have any access to structural, legitimate funds coming either from the government or non-government entities. So how does the situation, when compared with Maldives, what do you think, these lack of funds, does the lack of funds hinders the kind of progress which they are capable of making? And or if you think that there has been some access to these development funds which are very crucial for these grassroots organizations and movements. Do
Um,
you?
yeah, very good question, Dev. Uh, I was hoping that we could actually talk about this in detail as well, because it's one of the key takeaways from COP as well. Access to financing is one of the areas, one of the bottlenecks for almost all the work that happens within the climate space, and shaping the narrative on climate justice and also even for the climate movement agenda. It's very important that these small communities and rural communities get access, and young leaders working within these communities and are coming from these areas are given the opportunity to work with large organizations and work towards bettering their community and also to get benefits from these, in essence, restitutions that are owed from developed countries. Maldives has played a leadership role at the international level when it comes to the global goals on adaptation that was, I think, brought to the public eye in 2022. Adaptation is a very urgent need, and the global goal and adaptation presents us with an opportunity uh, to create a lot of political will and to bring resources towards and to put them into areas which are important and also crucial. especially when it comes to increasing climate risks. The issue with adaptation is that unlike mitigation, there is no fixed goal on adaptation. With mitigation, there is a numerical or number goal like 1.5 degrees, but adaptation is a little bit more abstract, and it's still being formulated, I think, at the in the policy level, in the academic level, like what are the steps, how does this look like? It's a discussion that's ongoing, but this discussion needs to move much more faster because the climate crisis and climate change that is happening is also not slowing down. So we need to speed up this process. Um, when you mentioned that the difficulty in accessing financing in India for rural communities and rural workers, social workers, and rural young leaders, this is the same in the Maldives. There are barriers to access finance and also resource, not just finance, technical resources, capacity building resources in the Maldives. Unless you have a network, a strong network of people, or you have training formally working with grant writing or proposal development, these kind of things, and you are very actively monitoring the grant space, it's very difficult for young people to get substantial funding to work on these kind of projects. Both of the project that I mentioned, both of the MSRO as well as ICP, Island Conservation Project, are volunteer-based organizations working with funding from various different donors. And it's a lot of the man hours or a lot of the work hours come from volunteers passionately working towards the goal of climate justice and the goal of adaptation and finding solutions. And this is something that you cannot account for. It's something that's invaluable. So important is this that it has to be somehow these volunteers are giving their life and their tears and their blood and sweat for these programs. They should be rewarded and they should be acknowledged and appreciated very much so. And to do that, non-governmental organizations rely on donor funding and also different models of perhaps fundraising or merchandising, these kind of things. But it is quite difficult. It's one of the main challenges that we face working in non-governmental spaces. And although the Maldives does have advantages when it comes to its tourism sector, when it comes to our tourism sector and our corporate partners who are very open and willing most of the time to work with non-governmental organizations, but the limitation of having full-time jobs or being a full-time student and also working for an NGO and volunteering your time is a real human limitation because you only have everyone has 24 hours in the day, and volunteers also have 24 hours in the day, and they just not it's not that they have more time, it's just that they love what they do more. So any free time that they get, whether it's a lunch break or whether it's a few moments on the train or on the bus, they will just work on what's important to them. And it's very important when it comes to climate advocacy that we recognize that a lot of this is built, a lot of the work that is being done, and a lot of the work that is being presented at international level, especially the young people's voices, are built on the backbone of young people doing things for absolutely free. And we should try at least to build a conversation around how can we recognize this contribution, how can this be pushed forward, in addition to trying to finance adaptation measures and also to trying to finance the adaptation programs that are being rolled out at the national level, even in the Maldives and also in the South Asian countries. When it comes to adaptation finance, particularly for the um, the organizations that I'm working with, which include Maldives Space Research Organization, Island Conservation Project, and Hoodh Association for Tourism. All three are focused on new technologies and new approaches. When it comes to MESRO, Maldives Space Research Organization is working with international partners uh, such as space sector leaders and private space sector private agencies, private companies, as well as national space organizations to create a space policy in the Maldives and create a space sector economy to use satellite imagery to mitigate the impact of soil erosion, to mitigate the impact of climate crisis, and also to create new and innovative platforms or portals of data which can allow us to be more disaster risk ready, and also reduce the impact of disasters that might be facing the country. As you may know, in 2004 there was the tsunami in South Asia, and this impacted the Maldives in particular because we were a low-lying country and we had no idea that it was on the way, and it was quite, we were very unprepared for it. So one area, this incident in particular has shaped the Maldivian psyche, and also we have a national day that we celebrate called Unity Day. And we try to, at MSRO, we've done work to try to leverage this new and space Earth observation and also ground truthing to try to build platforms that can inform policymakers, the meteorological office, the disaster management center, to give them data around wave movements and also storms and things like this that can help us be more prepared. When it comes to the Island Conservation Project is also working with the Government of Australia to implement a grant on mangrove conservation using Australian funding to build mangrove protected areas in the Maldives. And Hoodh Association for Tourism, which works in the south, particularly towards building entrepreneurship among young people and to look at sustainable entrepreneurship, sustainable business models, particularly using the Sustainable Development Goals as a measure for how you can build a sustainable business, especially sustainable tourism when it comes to guest houses, which is the mid-tier of Maldivian tourism. So, working with these different community groups and different NGOs, the Hoodh Association for Tourism has used financing from the UN and also from the UN agencies, as well as the National Youth Ministry, which gets some of the support from international donors. So I can say that while there is accessibility to some financing, it has not, it's not sustainable and it's not constant, and there is always the concern of trying to deliver donor targets instead of perhaps letting donor targets dictate or shape the work that we do in the community can be detrimental. And as practitioners in development and also young people working in the field, we try to advise our donor partners and also our partner organizations. We should really look at a very consultative approach, and most of our donors are very open to this kind of consultative approach, but sometimes there can be prescriptive thinking that kind of creeps into these programs. So we have to be, actively thinking about these things and also be very aware about this. But as you highlighted, adaptation financing is an area that looks very promising for countries like the Maldives, but there are still barriers for non-governmental organizations and small community-based leaders or young people to access it directly. And this should be made more accessible. It should be the work of, I think, the international organizations plus the national government to try to bring it closer to young people, because there are really good ideas, and the community on each island would are best suited to recognize how they should spend or how they should work on to adapt their island to be more resilient.
Thank you, Huth, for rather very vividly letting us know the kind of progress with respect to adaptation and mitigation progress that Maldives has undertaken, despite the lack of sustainable climate financing. And you just mentioned that most of these donors, wherein we get our development funds from, these are located in the global south, in the countries which have historically committed, a lot of loss per se to these underdeveloped and marginalized communities. And when we access funds to from these big corporate houses and big civil societies and located in the global north, there is for sure some sort of a bias in terms of the kind of things that they want to invest in. So yeah, very, this is very appropriate even in terms of even when we see it in terms of India, and at the same time we spoke with our counterparts in Bangladesh as well. This problem is recurrent. Secondly, you mentioned about the kind of disaster and damage that natural disasters like the tsunami you mentioned in 2004 brings. So, who I'm really concerned because I am a person who has studied climate from an intersectional perspective. We see how the same problem is impacting different communities differently. Something which I see even in India, and I spoke with people from Bangladesh and Pakistan as well, for that matter. We found out that there has been some kind of dissonance when it comes to the mainstream climate discourse. It is heavily occupied by people who are coming from privileged sections of the society. It is heavily occupied by people who have access to more resources, who have access to good education, maybe English speaking backgrounds, metropolitan areas, things like that, whose identities are in terms of in relative perspectives more privileged than the others. So this leads to some kind of a polarization, and it also leads to exclusion, or rather a structural exclusion of these marginalized folks joining the forefronts of the movement. However, if you see otherwise, when we talk about any climate disaster situation, any climate shock or stress which takes place, it is the marginalized of us, is the marginalized and vulnerable communities of our nations which are impacted the most, which gets disproportionately impacted. Not as if the others are not, but the kind of impact felt by these communities is way more, it's way disproportionate. Even when we see in terms of the kind of contributions they have to the global CO2 or methane emissions. So I wanted to ask you, with respect to the climate justice movement in Maldives, when you see it from an intersectional perspective, uh, who are these marginalized groups and how visible these groups are? And do you think that this growing movement in Maldives is taking care of including, or rather deliberate inclusion of such communities in the mainstream, or maybe putting them in the forefronts of the movement? To you, Mahfoud.
Thank you, Dev. I think that's like a very important aspect that you've highlighted. In my experience as well, particularly in the youth peace and security sector, there is a challenge in trying to bring more representation of vulnerable groups within society, especially in the Maldives. It's a very big challenge because again, there is not enough investment in trying to bring these voices to the mainstream. And one thing that I've found is that in the Maldives, at least there is a conscious effort by non-governmental organizations as well as development actors, including government agencies and international donor organizations and international organizations. They do try to reach out to these vulnerable groups, particularly in the Maldives. This would be groups of people such as women and elderly, as well as persons with disabilities. These groups would be asymmetrically impacted by any climate event that happens, and at least within the messaging, it is included. But the effort to include vulnerable groups within policy making, including young people in policy and decision making, is something that I've been advocating for since 2016 onwards, since United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250. This has been something that we have been working towards at the civil society level, and also advocating for in the government. However, there are mechanisms that offer some level of representation to women, persons with disabilities, and also elderly. There are civil society organizations that work within the Maldives that try to represent these groups of people. But as you say, the structural exclusion can happen either with no malice or ill intent. It does happen sometimes where you have people from the north or people from the south, because our capital is right in the center, almost in the center of the country, may not have as many opportunities as somebody who's living in the highly urbanized, developed main city or capital city of Male. And in order to rectify this, in order to remedy this problem of opportunities being abundant or quite available in the capital city. Something that we've done, the organizations that I work with in particular, what we've done is we've taken our programming and the little funding that we can get, that we can secure, we move it to rural areas. In particular, when you look at the north of the Maldives, we have the Island Conservation Project working in the Nuno Atoll, which is in the north. And also then we have in the south Hoodh Association for Tourism, working with tourism guest houses and tourism vendors to build social businesses. And then we have the Maldives Space Research Organization, working with national level stakeholders and working internationally to bring opportunities back to the country to create space policy and a space economy in the Maldives using new technologies or new to the Maldives at least, like Earth observation for policy making, ground truthing, and these kind of things to try to build a stronger narrative, evidence-based narrative around climate justice. Uh, what we all do, even what MSRO does, is that it will take programming to rural spaces, particularly with the MSRO, the Goidu Earth Observation Pilot, which looked at the hyperspectral drone imaging and also IMSA imaging, basically using different layers of satellite imaging to identify seagrass, soil erosion, mangrove areas, and to see how plantations or farms functioning, how much water is going to which plant. These programs are not done in these highly populated cities. It's done in rural areas, and uh, although there are many efforts taken by non-governmental organizations, as I've listed, to try to give young people from these rural areas opportunities to engage with these kind of work. More needs to be done in terms of representation by the policy makers and the decision makers at the national level, by the national government and the local government level, to bring young people to the decision making and policy making table. Because what we see is sometimes young people may be seen in a very tokenistic fashion, and they are invited to maybe consultations where their thoughts and their feelings are requested or are asked for by policymakers. But at the end of the day, young people are quite smart and they know when they are not being listened to. So they may not engage with these consultative processes, which are only for namesake. So this is something you will see even in things like a voter turnout in the Maldives in the electoral process. So young people may feel more disenfranchised and there's less trust in institutions. And this is an area where I think not only in governance but also in climate justice, that institutions need to play a bigger role in trying to bring people together of all segments in the population, but especially young actors and young leaders who are working with the community need to be involved. The institutions, the ministries, the agencies, they need to go out of their way instead of young people having to kind of shape themselves into a mold that the institutions or the agencies would recognize or accept. So I think more needs to be done to recognize the work of these civil society actors and young leaders who are doing important, valuable work. And in my opinion, even in the Maldives, a lot more can be done in particularly in the climate justice narrative and also climate justice work to really recognize the work that's really been done. There are young people who are doing innovative things like creating there was this one program under the Asian Development Bank funding uh, to to highlight these innovative solutions for sustainability. And a few of these young people came up with uh, essentially it's a coloring book that can be used while you go for swimming in the Maldivian oceans, and you can identify sea life, corals, and also seagrass, and this gives you education, physical activity, and also makes you closer to nature. So it's a combined cross-sectional approach. So these kind of really innovative, even like simple innovative ideas can have a very big impact on the growing generation, because from what I see, we are very much disconnected from nature, even in the Maldives. Our daily lives does not reflect the internet pictures that you may see of a lush green, beautiful sandy beach that our international friends can see. The common Maldivian may not be able to see those beautiful beaches very often, maybe once or twice a year. And this is like the disparity or the disconnect from the image that we show the international community and the lived reality of people in the Maldives. Yeah, thank you there.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you very much for very beautifully summing it up. I had a few questions, but I think we are running less on time. So my last question to you would be very simple. Any three things which you want to send out as a message to the growing youth-led climate justice movement involving organizers, activists, advocates, and people working in the policy space, tech space? Any three messages which you would want to share as a person, as a community leader belonging to a MAPA community that is most affected people in areas? So to you, Hood.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'd like to request that the global north support the global south, young leaders, young researchers, and to overcome the gatekept data, the research, the papers, and the paywalls. This is a very real problem that young students and young researchers face. So a lot more can be done by collaboration and sharing resources, twinning programs perhaps. The mechanism or the format is not important, but I think it's very important and high time that the global north try to engage directly with their peers in the global south, because the global south is more than willing and able and dreaming of working in this space. There are so many bright eyes and bright minds that are waiting for any opportunity. And for a second thing, to approach climate justice and the climate movement very much from a decolonization perspective, a decolonized approach is very important, because we cannot, as I said, it's almost impossible to get communities to rally around a prescriptive model of development. It has to be consultative. It has to come from the grassroots up to policy level. And this is essential in building consensus and in building ownership of whatever development project that you are building. And lastly, I would just want to tell all of my peers, whether it's institutional or agencies or even grassroots level leaders, be hopeful, be positive. Together, I think there is the scope to make a good impact. Climate justice, climate change might seem like an insurmountable mountain, but I think together, working together, there is good progress that we can make. Already we've done so much, and there is more that we can achieve together. And the Maldives stands united with the community of South Asia and also with the global North and global South. We stand in solidarity to work towards climate justice, and we are going to be a voice that will be heard across the world when it comes to climate justice and climate change.
Thank you so much, Ruth. To be honest, it's for a lot of people that we've spoken on this platform prior. It has been about building community power, building a people powered movement where people have the autonomy to choose for themselves, to give direction to their lives. So, in just in addition to that, I would also like to point out that towards the end of the series, once we end the whole Climate Baithak series, we are planning on creating a South Asian youth mentorship body for climate action. This whole body would I just realized when I was just planning on ideation part for this whole event, for this whole series, I was searching for organizations which have been working very closely within the South Asian region just to bridge that boundaries, the gap which the boundaries create. However, to my surprise, there was no practically organization which is practically working in the climate justice discourse. So we thought that once this whole series ends, why not we create one wherein we bring diverse group of passionate climate justice activists, organizers, community leaders from across South Asia to empower these emerging youth-led organizations and activists and collectives, because mostly they are not funded. They are a lot of at a lot of places they have to face a lot of crisis situation, a lot of difficulties. Sometimes this whole like leading a climate justice youth collective also becomes very cumbersome and a difficult ordeal. So I thought, with our support, with people who have been in the movement for some years now, people who can share their guidance, support, and the kind of tools and resources which might be necessary to amplify efforts and make tangible difference into whatever space that they're working, whatever country, whatever region they're working with. So we see it more than just a network, but we see it rather as the community dedicated to nurturing the next wave of climate action leaders in South Asia. So this was something I wanted to share. Who we would love to have your support on this. Once this whole series gets over, we'll be sending you the details of how you can join and how you can contribute this to this body. So really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dev. Once again, thank you for Climate Baithak for this opportunity to speak on something that is very close to my heart. And also, even though the work that I do in governance and also supporting these NGOs, perhaps from the first glance, not directly, within climate, but all our work is connected with climate, and
Yes.
it's so much at the heart of everything we do. And again, for this organization or platform that you're hoping to build that will bring together so many of our peers, I think that's very exciting news, and I'm more than happy to help you in any way I can. This is a wonderful initiative that you have begun, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Who's really honored. So, with this, we end today's conversation, the fourth episode of Climate Baithak, with our special guest, Hoodh Ibrahim, joining from Maldives. We thank him, and we thank all the previous speakers as well for taking this series so far. Signing off in solidarity.